Thank you, everyone, for sticking it through lunch. I know everyone's probably needing their second coffee now, but we have a lot to cover today, and it's just beginning. So I'm going to skip my own introductions and dive straight into the topic, which is From Streets to Offices, Unblocking LGBTQ Talent. And I want to start with a question. Are you a numbers person or a people person? Numbers person, people in the room? Hands up. Do you like looking at decks and charts and such? No, not so much. All right, so let me put this into context. So this is the Berlin startup map. And what I wanted to know was, does the nearly 4,000 startups employing nearly 5% of this city's population impress you as a number? Or do the number of people who show up at parties and raves and protests in this city move you more? The reason I ask is because I come from a city of numbers, a city where we always look at the number of people who are on the streets, in the offices, the sales revenue, the year-on-year growth. This city is Hong Kong. And this photo, I'm pretty sure, is not one that you typically associate with a financial capital. But I've had the pleasure of spending nearly a decade there, from 2009 to 2019. And I've watched this startup ecosystem, as well as its community, LGBTQ community, grow. To give you context, when I first arrived in Hong Kong in 2009, it was a small little protest that barely squeezed into one of Hong Kong's narrow sidewalks for the Pride March. And by 2018, the Hong Kong Pride Parade attracted thousands of people and hosted international NGOs from across the Asia-Pacific, including places like China, Japan, Korea, and other parts of Southeast Asia. In fact, it was so big that it was officially attended by EU delegates that you see in this photo. And why am I telling you this story? It's because ultimately, numbers actually mean that people are being seen. And ultimately, numbers do sort of move us in an intuitive way. So let me return to the Berlin startup map. And you can see from the charts and numbers here that the Berlin startup ecosystem has grown. That's not surprising. And it's something that I had wanted to be a part of. So when I first joined the AsiaBerlin conference in 2017, what had struck me was the dynamic energy of the people in this city. It was the academics and the founders and the investors who were not only interested in talking about their startups, but also interested in thinking about public policy and art and culture. And it is because these people, and probably all of you in the room, who are sitting at intersections, who are enriching the conversation. Berlin is a city that sits at intersections. It is a haven for difference and diversity. And it is also known as a very queer city. In fact, I don't know if some of you might know this already, Berlin has been known as a queer city since the 19th century, for over 100 years. But in my 2 years here in the tech community, I've learned a few big lessons, 3 that I'll share with you today. So one is that while there are lots of people, lots of queer people in tech, they are not necessarily counted. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you go to Christopher Street Day, which is Berlin's Pride, you're surrounded by a sea of people. If you go to a tech conference or a tech company, you will very likely see someone who's visibly queer. And in contrast to that, why is it that Germany has only started having studies for LGBTQ experiences in the workplaces starting in 2019? This isn't just Berlin, it's Germany. Secondly, when I went to events, I began to meet a lot of leaders, tech founders, and people who were thinking deeply about building great teams and communities. And I noticed that I registered them because of the pronouns they were using, because of the issues they were raising, whether it was about visa, immigration status, whether it's about accessibility, and all the other intersections of queerness that did not necessarily require them to put the hashtag LGBTQ. In fact, if you search LGBTQ, like I did on the left there, you will see that most of the results are still travel. They don't actually showcase the number of companies that are in Berlin doing great work. And the third is that a lot of companies in Berlin are using still a checkbox approach to diversity and inclusion. They're not necessarily thinking about it in a more holistic way. So for example, if they found someone like me who happens to check 3 boxes, I'm queer, Asian, and female, they've done 3 things, it's great. But there's a big problem with that. I specifically, as a queer Asian female, cannot speak for the person who has accessibility needs in Canada, or the trans person from Japan, or the person with mental health needs from Indonesia. And these people, with their perspectives, will actually enrich the conversation. They will directly affect product decisions, marketing decisions, and business strategy. Combined, it is these people in the room who will think about, for example, localization strategies that I won't know about for Indonesia. They'll think about market entry for Japan in ways that I won't know. And they will also be able to tell me certain product features that Canadians like that Germans don't. This is the type of value in bringing more people with different perspectives into the conversation. So the long and the short of it is, Berlin's a queer city. Berlin has growing startups. That doesn't by default mean that Berlin's tech scene is queer. But the good news is the foundation's there. This is a diverse city, and all of you are sitting here. So here are 3 other things that I have learned in my time in Berlin. One is that Berlin is a city of builders. And what I mean by that is it already is host to one of the world's largest LGBTQ tech conferences, Unicorns in Tech. There are organizations like Proud at Work that are doing research and raising awareness for the German-speaking workplaces and communities. Tech leaders who are queer are hosting podcasts and creating spaces and hosting events. They're just not necessarily waving the rainbow flag all the time, but they are great events to attend. And Berlin is such a dynamic city that someone like Sarah, who will be speaking on a panel tomorrow, was able to come in 2019 and found Queer.js when she found that there wasn't a visible queer tech community as late as 2019. And since she founded it 2 years ago, the network has already expanded to all the global cities, like London, New York, and Toronto. Secondly, what I noticed was actually a lot of great big tech companies were also doing a lot of good behind-the-scenes work. They were establishing ERGs. They were hiring more inclusively, not just for HR departments, but actually amongst different teams, whether it's engineering or design. And they were also creating public resources with events, for example, that discuss bisexuality, something that is not often talked about in the queer community. And the final thing that I realized about Berlin and that I love about this city is that it flies under the radar with all its global talents. And what I mean by that is the likes of Popo Fan, who is a globally acclaimed filmmaker. He lives in Berlin, and his latest film was also produced by one of the world's, actually probably arguably the world's largest queer streaming platform, Gaga Ulala, which is headquartered in Asia. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Secondly, if anyone recognizes the app here, it's Lex, and it's a bootstrapped queer dating app that's also co-headquartered in Berlin. Most people don't know that. There are so many great founders and companies that are here, and they're not waving their home city. So it's up to their home city to be able to recognize them and showcase them. And so if I was to circle back to my original question of, are you a numbers person or a people person? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's something for you to do. You can either support ecosystem builders, you can hire people who come from training programs such as Frauenloop, which works with women who come from resident, migrant, and asylum status backgrounds in Germany, you can recognize that there are very active communities, like the indie game community in Berlin, that are very queer and led by a lot of women. They just like building stuff and they disappear. And on the other side, if you are a numbers person, you can count the number of people. You can count the companies that are doing great work, whether it's having an ERG, whether it's having same-sex benefits, whether it's having trans-inclusive policies. Just like community business. Community business in Hong Kong has been doing an LGBTQ index since 2011 and has been doing it every 2 years. I think Germany can do this too. And so I'll leave you with 3 ways in which you can think about supporting great communities. It doesn't have to just be the LGBTQ community. It's every type of diversity, whether you're BIPOC or from a migrant background. It is to amplify the work of people who are doing the work already. It is to extend your resources and your networks to the people who are most marginalized. And it is to include the people with perspectives other than your own in a conversation so that they can open up markets and opportunities you've never even thought of. And so think not in checklists and checkboxes for diversity. Think about building blocks. What is the city that we want to build? What is the tech and startup ecosystem that we want to build together? And so I'll close off today by inviting you all to take advantage of this great conference and go randomly select a program with a title for some topic that you've never heard of, because it's very likely that you will learn something that you had also not discovered before. And with that, I will close off. Thank you for joining. Right.